The stillness before dawn hangs heavy, a silence not of peace, but of anticipation, a world holding its breath. And in this quiet, a question echoes, a tremor in the foundations of our days. Why this gnawing unease, this constant, shallow pursuit of something more that always slips through our fingers? We build towering structures in our lives, careers, relationships, possessions, yet find ourselves adrift in a sea of disconnection. This pervasive ache, this spiritual famine, isn't an accident of modern living. It's the symptom of a profound breach, a psychic schism Jung so keenly observed, between the clamoring voice of the ego and the silent, ancient wisdom of the self. Our modern world, in its relentless march toward perceived progress, has inadvertently silenced a vital inner dialogue. We've become masters of the surface, adept at managing the visible, the tangible, the measurable. Yet beneath this polished veneer lies a void, a recognition of a deeper reality we've exiled. This video is an excavation, an attempt to reawaken that forgotten language, to piece together the fragments of a lost wholeness. We will journey through ancient texts, through the whispers of forgotten philosophies and the intricate symbolism of alchemical transformation, tracing the origins of this inner fragmentation. The path leads not to an egoic conquest, but to a humbling confrontation with a deeper, wilder truth residing within. It's a descent, not into madness, but into the very heart of our being. Yet this journey asks a perilous question, one that will linger long after the screen fades. What essential part of your waking self must surrender, must truly die, for the forgotten God, the self, to finally be reborn? This is not a gentle inquiry, but a stark confrontation with the necessary death that precedes true life. The answer lies in understanding the architecture of our own inner prisons, the very structures that keep us bound to a limited existence. The echo of that question sets our course. We begin by examining the most immediate and imposing structure within us, the one we mistake for our entire dwelling. This artificial summit, built on sand and egoic ambition, is the first barrier to the wilder, truer landscape of the soul. To see it clearly is to begin the dismantling, brick by painstaking brick. The tower of the ego, a monument to our perceived mastery, rises implacably in the landscape of the psyche. Its battlements are designed to protect a fragile citadel, a fortress of identity built to withstand the very truths that threaten its existence. We polish its stones with achievements, fortify its walls with opinions, and staff its ramparts with the opinions of others. It's a dizzying height, a place from which we survey a world we believe we command. But this elevation comes at a cost. The air is thin, the view distorted. From this vantage point, the vast, unfathomable sky of the self appears distant, alien. The ego, in its desperate bid for control, defines itself by what it is not. It rejects the messy, the unknown, the instinctual, shoring itself up against the very forces that could grant it genuine belonging. This self-imposed isolation breeds paranoia, a constant vigilance against perceived threats from within and without. Within these towering walls, a subtle fragmentation begins. The ego, in its attempt to impose order, shards the wholeness of experience. Different aspects of ourselves are compartmentalized, locked away in separate chambers, lest their untamed energies disrupt the carefully curated illusion of unified control. This is the primal split, the first tearing of the soul's fabric, where the coherent I becomes a collection of disparate, warring factions. Yet, the very structure that seeks to imprison also points towards its own undoing. The height, the isolation, the precariousness of its construction, all whisper of impermanence. The edifice of the ego, so grand and seemingly secure, is ultimately a gilded cage, blinding us to the deeper architecture of the soul. But what happens when we begin to see past the illusion of this constructed self? What world awaits when the tower's walls start to crumble, revealing a different kind of reflection? From this precarious perch, we must eventually turn our gaze downward, toward the treacherous depths that the ego so diligently tries to ignore. We've glimpsed the imposing edifice of the ego, a structure built on separation and control. But the ego's foundation is not a solid rock, but a seductive, rippling surface, one that distorts and consumes all that approaches. The myth of Narcissus speaks to this perilous allure, a story that resonates within the core of our modern malady. Narcissus, renowned for his breathtaking beauty, was captivated by his own reflection in a pool of water. He saw not just an image, but an ideal, a perfect embodiment of selfhood. This infatuation was not mere vanity, but a profound identification with a singular, flawless vision. He saw himself, but he did not truly know himself, mistaking the surface for the depth, the painted mask for the living face. His love for his reflection was a love for an illusion, and this illusion became his undoing. This ancient myth is a potent mirror to our present condition. We, too, are drawn to our reflections, amplified by screens and curated profiles, seeking validation in the polished surfaces we present to the world. The digital age has become our endless pool, a place where we can endlessly gaze at carefully constructed avatars, mistaking the curated image for genuine selfhood. This constant immersion in the self, or rather, the idea of the self, creates a psychic trap. When the ego becomes overly identified with its own reflection, it loses touch with the dynamic, ever-changing reality of the living soul. The world outside the mirror, the world of genuine connection and spontaneous being, begins to fade. We become prisoners of our own projected image, unable to move, unable to grow, our love for this idealized self, a silken cord that binds us. The profound tragedy of Narcissus is that his devotion to beauty led him only to his own quiet demise, a fading echo in the stillness of the water. This obsessive mirroring, this fixation on the self as an object of worship, leaves us hollowed out, unable to engage with the genuine fullness of life. It is a path that leads not to union, but to solitude and a profound suffering born of an empty embrace. But what lies beyond the allure of this perfect, unblemished reflection? What are the hidden mechanisms that drive this self-deception, and what ancient force dictates the rhythm of our own entrapment? The image in the water can only hold us for so long before the tides of reality begin to pull. The shimmering surface of Narcissus's pool, so captivating and ultimately so fatal, is governed by an unseen hand. This is the hand of time, not as a simple progression of moments, but as a deliberate architect of our psychological reality. We speak of time running out, of time healing all wounds, of time being a thief, but rarely do we consider time as a tool of our own internal dominion, a subtle force that shapes our very perception of self. Saturn, the ancient god of time and structure, presides over this relentless march. His symbol, the scythe, cuts through the ephemeral, demanding order, discipline, and a stark accounting of existence. In our modern lives, this archetype has calcified into the tick-tock of clocks, the deadlines of calendars, the relentless pursuit of efficiency. We are trained from youth to measure ourselves against the clock, to hoard time, to fear its passing, and to believe that true worth is found in productive output, meticulously catalogued. This temporal scaffolding, while offering a semblance of control, also serves to bind us. By rigidifying time into measured units and goals, we inadvertently imprison the soul's more fluid, cyclical nature. The present moment, with its infinite potential for presence and intuitive wisdom, is sacrificed at the altar of future accomplishment or past regret. We become so fixated on what's next, or what was, that the vibrant now, the only true space of being, becomes an unbearable void to be filled. Saturn's influence, when internalized excessively, breeds a deep anxiety. The ego, ever fearful of its own dissolution, uses the structure of time to create a sense of permanence, a belief that by controlling our schedules, we are somehow controlling our destiny. But this mastery is an illusion. Time, in its relentless passage, is a constant reminder of impermanence, and the ego's brittle defenses are no match for its ultimate power. This structured existence, while ostensibly life-affirming, can become a subtle prison, a way of managing existence without truly living it. We are bound by the demands of the clock, our inner rhythms dictated by external forces, our souls domesticated by the relentless march of minutes. But what if this temporal tyranny is not the only way to apprehend existence? What if there is a deeper, more ancient architect at work, one whose blueprints extend far beyond the confines of our measured days? The dominion of Saturn can blind us, but even in its shadow, true creation waits. Beneath the rigid structures imposed by Saturn's clock, a deeper blueprint exists, a source of order that the ego's frantic pacing has long obscured. We've seen how time can be a tool of psychic control, shaping our lives into predictable patterns that feed the ego's hunger for certainty. But this measured existence is merely a scaffolding, a temporary shelter that hides a far grander, more profound design. This deeper order is the work of the self, the forgotten architect of our true being. It is the unconscious, generative force that orchestrates the unfolding of our lives, not through rigid dictates, but through a dynamic, organic process of creation and transformation. Unlike the ego's frantic need to control, the self works with immense patience, weaving intricate patterns that are only revealed in their entirety over vast stretches of time. This architect is not a figure of authority to be obeyed, but a presence to be recognized, a wisdom to be communed with. Its blueprints are not etched in stone, but written in the language of instinct, intuition, and the symbolic whispers of dreams. We have, in our relentless pursuit of external validation and measurable progress, become deaf to its subtle voice, blind to its graceful movements. The ego, in its narcissistic embrace, has exiled this vital architect, leaving us adrift in a sea of manufactured purpose. The fragmentation we experience, the anxiety that gnaws at our peace, is a direct consequence of this estrangement. We are like a magnificent ship, built by a master craftsman, now being navigated by a novice captain who has no idea of the vessel's true potential or the vast ocean it is meant to explore. The ego's construction is impressive, undoubtedly, but it is a pale imitation, a hurried sketch compared to the profound, intricate masterpiece that the self longs to bring into being. To reconnect with this forgotten architect is not about dismantling the ego's achievements, but about integrating them into a larger vision. It is about understanding that true order arises not from external imposition, but from an inner alignment with a cosmic intelligence that knows our deepest purpose. But how can we distinguish the self's authentic light from the dazzling, deceptive glow that so often masquerades as enlightenment? The architect leaves no grand pronouncements, only subtle invitations. The ego, in its relentless pursuit of self-preservation, is a master of illusion. It understands that its reign is fragile, dependent on maintaining a facade of competence and control. To this end, it has perfected the art of deception, co-opting genuine spiritual impulses and twisting them into instruments of its own aggrandizement. This is the realm of false light, where authentic dawning is replaced by a dazzling, hollow imitation. We often mistake this false light for true enlightenment. It gleams with surface-level wisdom, offers quick-fix solutions, and speaks in the language of certainty and effortless victory. It promises power, prestige, and a perfected self, all without the messy, uncomfortable work of true transformation. This light is seductive because it plays directly into the ego's deepest desires. To remain unchanged, to escape suffering, and to attain a state of unassailable superiority. The ego's masquerade takes many forms. It can manifest as spiritual materialism, where the accumulation of psychic knowledge or purported spiritual attainments becomes a new form of possession, a way of affirming one's specialness. It can appear as a guru-like persona, where one claims to have all the answers, projecting an image of effortless wisdom to hide inner insecurity. Or it can be the relentless pursuit of positive thinking, where uncomfortable truths are bypassed in favor of bright, simplistic affirmations, a denial of the shadow that makes the light possible. This ersatz enlightenment offers a temporary balm, a fleeting sense of transcendence, but it ultimately leads to deeper disillusionment. It bypasses the crucibles of suffering that forge true character and the inherent paradoxes that reveal deeper wisdom. The ego's light is a spotlight designed to illuminate what it chooses, leaving vast swathes of the psyche in darkness. True spiritual illumination, however, is like the sun, bathing all, the bright and the dark, equally. It requires embracing the entirety of experience, not sanitizing it. The allure of this false light is so powerful because it promises what the ego craves most, an illusion of completion without any fundamental change. It offers a shortcut to feeling whole, a way to bypass the arduous journey of self-discovery. But this path, however brightly it shines, leads only to a more profound spiritual poverty, a deeper exile from the true, luminous self. What then is the authentic path to wisdom, and where can we find its hidden traces, even in the most unexpected of places? There are detours, disguised as progress, that can lead us further astray. In our relentless pursuit of the ego's gleaming facade, we often overlook the profound wisdom available in what appears to be a step backward, a regression into what we deem infancy or chaos. The ego recoils from such states, equating them with weakness, failure, and a loss of control. Yet, the Gnostic tradition, and indeed many ancient wisdom schools, understood that within these seemingly chaotic regressions lies a source of profound, often hidden, knowledge. Gnosis, in its deepest sense, refers to a direct, intuitive knowing, an illumination that bypasses intellectual dogma. This kind of knowing is not acquired through striving or accumulation, but through surrender and recognition. The ego's addiction to forward momentum, to constant progress, blinds it to this paradoxical path. True insight often emerges when we cease our frantic efforts to control and instead allow ourselves to be drawn into the primal waters of our own being. Think of the child. The child is not yet burdened by the ego's complex defenses. Its emotional landscape is raw, immediate, and honest, while the ego fears regression into such states, seeing them as a betrayal of mature identity. The soul recognizes them as a return to its source. The untamed emotions, the instinctive reactions, the unmediated perceptions, these are not imperfections to be eradicated, but vital currents of the psyche that the ego has dammed up. The ego fears regression because it feels like a diminishment, a loss of status. But true spiritual development often involves a conscious descent. It is in these moments of perceived vulnerability, when the ego's grip loosens, that the unconscious can surface, bringing with it buried truths, forgotten capacities, and a deeper understanding of our interconnectedness. This is not a passive fading, but an active engagement with the very depths of our being, a process of reclaiming what has been disowned. The Gnostics spoke of a hidden knowledge, a spark of the divine trapped within the material realm. This spark can only be ignited through a radical turning inward, a recognition of the divine not as an external entity, but as the very essence of our being. Such recognition often requires a shedding of the ego's carefully constructed identity, a willingness to become like the child, open, receptive, and unafraid of the unknown. This journey into the depths, however counterintuitive, is where true illumination resides. But what happens when the deep currents we unearth clash with the surface order we have so carefully maintained? The inner world is not always in harmony. The unconscious revelations unearthed during states of regression and the raw, unmediated truths they bring forth inevitably create friction. The ego's carefully constructed edifice, built on order and control, finds itself challenged by the wild energies bubbling up from below. This is the beginning of the inner civil war, a conflict not of armies, but of competing realities within the human psyche. On one side stands the ego, the self-appointed ruler, armed with its logic, its doctrines, its fear of annihilation. It perceives the emerging unconscious material as a destructive force, an invasion that threatens its very existence. It mobilizes its defenses: denial, rationalization, repression. It will twist, distort, and discredit anything that challenges its narrative of control and superiority. The shadow aspects of ourselves, the instincts, the primal emotions, the unacknowledged desires, these are branded as enemies, banished to the dark corners of the psyche. On the other side is the emerging unconscious, the realm of the shadow. This is not inherently evil, but rather primordial, untamed, and often repressed. It holds the raw energy of our being, the instincts that were deemed unacceptable, the emotions that were too powerful to express. When these energies are denied passage through acceptable channels, they do not disappear. Instead, they gather force in the darkness, exerting a disruptive influence from below, shaping our behavior in ways we don't understand, fueling the very anxiety the ego seeks to banish. The civil war is fought in the quiet spaces of our lives, in moments of unintended outburst, in recurring nightmares, in unexplained compulsions. It is the clash between the persona we present to the world and the unacknowledged truth that yearns for expression. The ego wages a constant battle to maintain its illusion of wholeness, while the shadow, denied its rightful place, becomes a source of profound disease, a hidden wound that festers. This internal conflict creates a persistent hum of tension, a feeling of being at war with oneself. We are fragmented, our energy dissipated in this ongoing struggle. The ego's victory is a Pyrrhic one, achieved at the cost of vibrancy, authenticity, and the potential for genuine integration. But this war need not be one of annihilation. There is a path toward reconciliation, a way for these warring factions to find a fragile peace. What lies beyond the battlefield, and what price is paid for this internal division? The outcome of this war determines the very shape of our existence. Each skirmish in the inner civil war leaves its mark, deepening the psychological wounds and further solidifying the ego's defenses. The relentless battle to maintain an outward appearance of order, to present a coherent and controlled self to the world, comes at a profound cost. The soul becomes a prisoner of its own form. The very structures we erect for protection become gilded cages, trapping the vital essence of our being. The soul, in its pure, formless potential, yearns for expression, for experience, for connection. It is a fluid, dynamic entity, capable of infinite adaptation and boundless creativity. However, the ego, in its fear of disintegration, insists on a rigid, defined form. It dictates what is acceptable, what is permissible, what constitutes a proper identity. It sculpts the soul into a shape that can be recognized, categorized, and controlled, a shape that often bears little resemblance to its true, wild nature. This confinement manifests in myriad ways. We become prisoners of our social roles, our professional identities, our relationship statuses. We are defined by what we have, what we achieve, and how we are perceived. The soul, eager to explore new possibilities, to express a different facet of its being, finds itself blocked by these imposed boundaries. It is told, implicitly or explicitly, that to deviate from its assigned form is to invite chaos, shame, or rejection. The shadow, unable to find expression through the soul's natural channels, becomes a source of discontent, a restless force battering against the prison bars. The ego, meanwhile, clings ever more fiercely to its rigid identity, its fear of dissolution intensifying. This is the paradox of control. In seeking to liberate itself from suffering through rigid definition, the ego actually imprisons the very essence it seeks to protect, condemning the soul to a slow, internal suffocation. The outer world often mirrors this inner imprisonment. We live in societies that valorize conformity, that reward adherence to established norms, and that marginalize or pathologize those who deviate too far from the accepted forms. This external pressure reinforces the internal struggle, making it even harder for the soul to break free from its self-imposed limitations. Yet, the yearning for freedom, for authentic expression, remains a potent force, a silent rebellion against the tyranny of form. But what happens when the illusion of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate this world, begins to crack, revealing the true nature of our confinement. The external facade is but a reflection of an older, more pervasive cage. The persona, the mask we wear for the world, is a vital tool for social navigation. It is the carefully crafted presentation of self that allows us to interact with others, to fulfill societal expectations, and to maintain a functional identity. However, for the ego that feels perpetually threatened, this mask can become more than a tool. It can become a cage. The more we over-identify with our persona, the more we risk becoming lost behind its facade, a prisoner of our own presented self. We meticulously design these masks, choosing the smiles, the phrases, the attitudes that we believe will elicit approval and avoid judgment. We become actors in our own lives, performing roles that may bear little resemblance to our inner reality. The danger lies in the unconsciousness of this performance. When we forget that it is a mask and begin to believe it is our true face, we trap ourselves. We suppress entire dimensions of our personality, the aspects that do not fit the approved image. This can lead to a profound sense of alienation from ourselves. We feel like imposters, even to ourselves. The genuine desires, the authentic emotions, the unique talents that do not align with the persona are stifled, relegated to the shadows. The soul, meant to be dynamic and multifaceted, is flattened into a two-dimensional projection. It is a constant performance, an exhausting effort to maintain a facade that constantly demands more concessions from our true being. The ego, ever vigilant, derives a perverse sense of security from this solidified persona. It feels protected by the approval it garners, by the avoidance of social friction. But this security is illusory. It is built on a foundation of denial, and the repressed aspects of ourselves will inevitably seek expression, often in disruptive ways. This internal conflict breeds a deep dissatisfaction, a longing for something more real, something that resonates with our core. This confinement within the social script, this entrapment behind the mask, creates a spiritual famine. We may be lauded by society, may achieve outward success, but inwardly we remain starving, disconnected from the nourishing source of our own authentic self. The persona, designed to facilitate connection, ironically becomes the ultimate barrier, isolating us in an echo chamber of our own making. But this prison, however formidable, can eventually be unlocked. There exists a path that requires not the strengthening of the mask, but its courageous dismantling, leading to a deeper, more profound understanding of healing. In the depths of this imprisonment, when the soul feels suffocated by its own carefully constructed form, a profound descent becomes necessary. This is the path of the wounded healer, a journey not of outward conquest, but of inward exploration into the very heart of suffering. It is a recognition that true healing does not come from avoiding pain, but from embracing it, from understanding its archetypal significance, and from allowing it to transmute us. The wounded healer archetype speaks of individuals who have themselves undergone immense suffering, who have walked through the fires of personal agony, and in doing so, have gained a unique insight into the nature of pain and healing. They carry their wounds not as scars of defeat, but as badges of hard-won wisdom. Their own brokenness becomes the very tool through which they can connect with and alleviate the suffering of others. From the ego's perspective, this descent is a terrifying prospect. It is the ultimate regression, the relinquishing of control, the surrender to vulnerability. The ego wants to be perfect, whole, and triumphant, never admitting to the shadow side of existence. It fears that to acknowledge its own wounds is to invite further devastation, to confirm its inadequacy. But the soul knows differently. It understands that true wholeness is not the absence of wounds, but the integration of them. This descent is an alchemical process. It involves confronting the deepest fears, the most painful losses, the most profound betrayals. It is in these dark, often shunned places that the true gold of self-knowledge is hidden. The wounded healer does not offer platitudes or easy answers. Instead, they offer their presence, their understanding, their quiet strength derived from having navigated the very darkness that the other fears. They have seen the abyss, and they have found a way back, not by denying its existence, but by understanding its depths. This journey into the heart of one's own woundedness is not a solitary one. It is a communion with the universal suffering that binds all humanity. By walking into their own darkness, the wounded healer becomes an emissary of light, not a blinding, superficial glare, but a gentle, steady flame that can illuminate the path for others struggling in the shadows. But what is the language of this dark journey, and how can we understand the symbolic architecture of transformation itself? The descent is only the beginning of a profound reordering. The language of the descent, the subtle tongue spoken in the realm of transformation, is not one of words alone, but of symbols, of images, of a living, breathing alchemical code. We have seen how the ego's structures and the persona's masks can imprison us, and how the willingness to embrace our wounds is key to unlocking these prisons. But how do we interpret the profound shifts occurring within us? This is where the ancient art of alchemy offers its profound insights. Alchemy, far from being merely a primitive attempt to turn base metals into gold, is a sophisticated allegory for the inner transformation of the human psyche. Its symbols are not arbitrary, but represent deep psychological processes, archetypal energies, and the stages of the soul's journey toward wholeness. The alchemist's laboratory is the human heart, and the crucible is the crucible of experience. Consider key alchemical symbols. The nigredo, the blackening, represents the initial stage of dissolution, the confrontation with the shadow, the breaking down of old structures. This is the necessary darkness before any new creation can emerge. Then comes the albedo, the whitening, a purification, a subtle dawning where the soul begins to shed its impurities and reveal a new, refined essence. This is followed by the citrinitas, the yellowing, a stage of burgeoning solar consciousness where wisdom begins to illuminate understanding. Finally, there is the rubedo, the reddening, the achievement of the great work, the integration of opposites, the birth of the unified self. These stages are not linear, but cyclical, often requiring repeated passes through the same symbolic landscapes. The alchemical language speaks of marriages of opposites, of the union of the masculine and feminine principles, of the dissolution of the fixated ego, and the birth of a new consciousness. It is a language of paradox and transformation, a symbolic map of the soul's arduous but ultimately luminous journey. Understanding this symbolic system is not about academic study, but about recognition. These symbols are archetypal, resonating within the collective unconscious. They are the ancient whispers of the self. By learning to decipher them, we begin to understand the deeper currents guiding our own personal transformation. We move from being passive subjects of change to active participants, recognizing the inner alchemy that is always at work. But if these symbols are keys to understanding the self, what are the specific archetypes that unlock its deepest chambers, particularly those that represent the union of seemingly disparate inner forces? As we delve deeper into the symbolic language of transformation, two archetypes emerge with particular potency, acting as vital keys to unlocking the deeper chambers of the self, the animus and the anima. These are not merely abstract concepts, but fundamental projections that inform our understanding of ourselves and our relationships, crucial elements in the grand tapestry of psychic integration. In the realm of the feminine psyche, the animus represents the masculine principle, the inner father, the logical, assertive, and rational aspect. Conversely, in the masculine psyche, the anima represents the feminine principle, the inner mother, the emotional, intuitive, and nurturing aspect. These are not about gender in its biological sense, but about the inherent qualities of the psyche that are often projected onto the outer world. When these archetypes are undeveloped or negatively projected, they can cause immense internal and external discord. A woman struggling with a harsh, critical animus might find herself overly aggressive, rationalistic, or dismissive of her own emotional needs. A man dominated by a negative anima might become moody, indecisive, or overly dependent. The ego, often identified with only one of these poles, can become dangerously unbalanced. The work of individuation, the process of becoming a whole, integrated self, involves recognizing and integrating these anima and animus projections. It means turning inward and acknowledging these inner masculine and feminine forces, not as alien intruders, but as essential parts of our own being. This integration is not about destroying one principle in favor of the other, but about achieving a harmonious balance, a sacred marriage of opposites within the psyche. When the animus and anima are integrated, they cease to be projections that disrupt our relationships and instead become powerful resources for inner wisdom and creative expression. The developed animus within a woman grants her assertiveness and clarity, while the integrated anima within a man allows for emotional depth and intuitive understanding. They are the internal keys that unlock a more complete and nuanced experience of life, leading us toward a unified sense of self. But what lies at the heart of the ego's resistance to such profound integration, and what is it so desperately attempting to avoid? The allure of wholeness is often met with its deepest fear. The ego's tenacious grip on its own limited identity is fueled by a primal terror, a deep-seated dread of what lies beyond its carefully constructed borders. This fear is not of external threats, but of an inner void, an existential emptiness that it believes would annihilate its very being. The prospect of merging with the boundless, formless nature of the self is, to the ego, the ultimate threat. This fear of emptiness, also known as the fear of annihilation or the void, is at the core of many of our neuroses and anxieties. The ego has built its entire existence on definition, on the accumulation of attributes, experiences, and opinions that solidify its sense of separateness. To face emptiness is to confront the possibility that these definitions are fragile, that the self it cherishes is not an inherent, immutable entity, but a construct, a temporary arrangement of energies. When we are too identified with the ego and too afraid of this inner void, we engage in a frantic filling of that perceived space. Our lives become a constant accumulation of distractions, ambitions, possessions, and relationships, all designed to keep the terrifying silence at bay. We seek surrogate fulfillments, fleeting pleasures, and external validation to mask the inner lack. This is why the ego resists true spiritual practice, which often involves a surrender of control and an embrace of the unknown. The ego cannot comprehend that emptiness is not a void of meaninglessness, but a pregnant space of pure potential. It is the fertile ground from which true creation arises. It is the zero, the divine womb, the primordial state from which all existence emerges and to which it returns. By fearing emptiness, the ego cuts itself off from its own source, from the very wellspring of creativity and boundless being. This terror breeds a desperate clinging to what is known, a resistance to change, and a deep-seated insecurity that underlies even the most outwardly confident persona. The ego's struggle to avoid emptiness is a Sisyphean task, an endless effort that ultimately only reinforces the very fear it seeks to overcome. But how can we begin to navigate this terrifying void, and what ancient wisdom traditions offer us their maps and tools for this most profound of journeys? There are hidden archives that hold the keys. In our quest to understand the ego's fear of the void, we are reminded that the self, though exiled from our conscious awareness, leaves indelible traces of its existence. These traces are not found in waking logic or reasoned argument, but in the profound, symbolic language of our dreams. Dreamwork, in its most potent form, serves as the archive of the self, a sacred repository of its wisdom, its warnings, and its enduring presence. Dreams are not random firings of neurons, nor are they mere reflections of our waking preoccupations. They are offerings from the unconscious, potent symbolic narratives that speak a deeper truth about who we are and what our soul is evolving towards. The ego, with its constant need for rational explanation and its fear of the unknown, often dismisses or misunderstands these nocturnal messages. It seeks to control them, to interpret them through its limited lens, or to ignore them altogether, thus perpetuating its own ignorance. The archive of the self within our dreams contains not only personal memories and repressed experiences, but also echoes of the archetypal patterns that govern all of human existence. Symbols that appear in our dreams, ancient figures, primal landscapes, potent scenarios, are not personal fantasies but manifestations of universal truths carried in the collective unconscious. By learning to engage with these dreams with reverence and curiosity, rather than judgment or dismissal, we begin to access this profound archive. Working with dreams involves listening to their symbolic language, not trying to force them into pre-existing egoic frameworks. It means paying attention to the emotions they evoke, the themes they explore, and the recurring patterns they reveal. This is how the ego can begin to hear the forgotten architect, to understand the inner civil war, and to glimpse the unity that underlies its own fragmentation. The dream world is a direct line to the self, a personal oracle that speaks in the language of the soul. To truly engage with this archive is to undertake a form of divination, a process of discerning the profound truths hidden within the symbolic tapestry of our inner lives. It is through this intimate dialogue with our unconscious that we can begin to dismantle the ego's fears and reclaim the lost wisdom of our authentic being. But what happens when the external structures we have often inherited, the internalized authority figures, appear to mirror and reinforce our inner confinement, creating a formidable internal dictator? The ego's resistance to its own potential dissolution is often reinforced by an internalized external authority. This is reflected in the concept of the demiurge, an idea found in various Gnostic traditions that speaks of a lesser, flawed creator deity who fashioned the material world, imposing rigid laws and limiting the divine spark within. In our psychological landscape, this demiurge represents those internalized structures of authority, the doctrines, moral codes, and parental injunctions that have been so deeply ingrained that they function as an internal dictator, dictating what is right and wrong, good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable. This internalized authority is what compels us to obey societal norms, to adhere to expectations, and to self-regulate in ways that are often antithetical to our deeper needs and natural inclinations. It is the voice that tells us we are not good enough, that we must achieve more, that we must conform, that we must suppress our true desires. This is the inner censor, the voice of the internalized parent or societal expectation that operates with the pseudo-divine authority of the demiurge. When we are dominated by this internal demiurge, we are perpetually seeking external validation, or conversely, perpetually fearing external judgment. Our freedom is curtailed not by external forces, but by the internalized mandates that govern our every thought and action. The ego, itself a construct, finds comfort in these externalized rules, as they provide a framework for its own existence and a justification for its fearful vigilance. It believes that by obeying this internal dictator, it can somehow avoid the ultimate condemnation. This internalized authority creates a profound spiritual prison. The divine spark within, the true self, is obscured by the rigid pronouncements of this lesser, imitative God. We live in accordance with a blueprint not of our own soul's making, but of an imposed, often flawed system. Breaking free from this influence requires a radical act of discernment, a peeling away of these layers of imposed identity to reveal the ancient, uncorrupted source of true authority that resides within. But what is revealed when we finally see past the limitations of this internal dictator, and what does it mean to find the true reflection beyond the distorted image? The source of our authority has been misunderstood. The persistent echo of the internalized demiurge, the self-imposed limitations and judgments, has led us to believe that our inner world is either empty or inherently flawed. We project our fear onto this inner space, seeing it as a void waiting to be filled with external approval or a battleground for our warring internal factions. But what if the mirror into which we have been so frantically gazing, the surface upon which Narcissus lost himself, was never truly empty? What if it always held a deeper, more profound reflection? The revelation that the mirror was never empty is a turning point. It signifies a shift from seeing the inner landscape as a desolate wasteland driven by fear and lack, to recognizing it as a teeming, vibrant realm of potential and inherent wisdom. The emptiness we perceive is not an absence of being, but an absence of our capacity to truly see. It is like staring at a clear sky and declaring it empty, failing to recognize the infinite depth and the myriad celestial bodies it contains. This realization demands a radical reorientation. Instead of desperately seeking external validation or filling ourselves with superficial distractions, we turn inward with a newfound reverence. We begin to understand that the wisdom we seek is not out there, but within us. The self, the forgotten architect, the true source of authority, is not a distant deity, but the very essence of our being, waiting to be recognized. The symbolic language we have been exploring, the archetypes, the dreams, these are not distractions, but direct transmissions from this inaccessible inner source. To see the mirror as not empty, but full, is to transform our relationship with ourselves and with the world. It means understanding that our perceived limitations are often self-imposed illusions, and that within us lies a capacity for infinite growth, boundless love, and profound creative power. This is the heart of true gnosis, the direct knowing that transcends intellectual understanding. The reflection is not a foreign image to be admired or feared, but the very face of our own deepest truth. But what is the final act of recognition, the ultimate step required to fully embrace this truth and to step beyond the confines of our former selves? This involves a profound, perhaps terrifying, transition. To truly embrace the fullness of the inner mirror, the boundless reflection of the self, requires more than just recognition. It demands a crossing of a threshold, a symbolic death that allows for a profound rebirth into a new order of being. This is the essence of individuation, the archetypal journey towards becoming whole, and it is an act that often involves a perceived dissolution of the ego's established identity. The threshold is a liminal space, a point of transition between the known and the unknown, the old self and the emerging self. It is a place where the ego's structures, built on fear and limitation, must be surrendered. This can feel like an archetypal death, the death of the false self, the persona, the deeply ingrained beliefs that have defined our existence. It is a terrifying prospect for the ego, which sees only annihilation, but it is a necessary dismantling for the soul to break free. This crossing is not a sudden event, but a process. It involves a conscious letting go of that which no longer serves, a willingness to step into the mystery, and a trust in the deeper intelligence of the self. It is akin to moving from a dark, familiar room into a vast, luminous landscape. The light might be blinding at first, the space overwhelming, but it is here that true freedom and authentic being are found. Individuation is not about rejecting the ego, but about reducing its tyrannical power. It is about allowing the ego to become a functional tool of the self, rather than its master. The ego's strengths, its capacity for organization, its ability to interact with the external world, can be integrated into a larger, more luminous purpose, guided by the deeper wisdom of the self. But this integration requires the death of the ego's illusion of ultimate control. The threshold represents a terrifying leap of faith. It is where we must relinquish our grip on what we believe to be our identity and trust in the unfolding process of becoming. It is the moment of standing on the precipice, knowing that to step forward means leaving behind the familiar shores of our former selves. But what awaits us on the other side of this apparent end, and what forgotten remembrance does the soul carry that the ego can never comprehend? The deepest truths lie in what we already know, but have forgotten. As we stand at the threshold, poised to step into the fullness of the self, a profound and ancient memory begins to surface. It is a remembrance that the ego, in its relentless pursuit of definition and control, has long suppressed. This is the memory of wholeness, of an original state of unity that precedes all fragmentation. The soul remembers what the ego, in its fractured state, cannot possibly comprehend. This remembrance is not a factual recall, but a visceral knowing, a deep resonance that speaks of an innate connection to all that is. It is the intuitive understanding that our perceived separateness is an illusion, a temporary distortion in the grand tapestry of existence. The soul carries the blueprint of its own divine origin, a memory of its inherent perfection that transcends all the limitations and traumas that the ego has collected. The ego, bound by its history and its fear, is incapable of grasping this remembrance. It operates within a framework of cause and effect, of past and present, of individual experience. The soul, however, exists in a timeless awareness, where the concept of beginning and end dissolves. It remembers the state before the fall, before the exile, before the internal civil war. This remembering is not a nostalgic yearning for a lost past, but a recognition of an eternal, present truth. To access this remembrance is to tap into a source of unwavering strength, profound peace, and boundless creativity. It is to understand that healing is not about acquiring something new, but about uncovering what has always been present. The journey of individuation, the descent into the depths, the integration of the shadow, all of these are processes of uncovering this primal memory, of stripping away the layers of egoic interference to reveal the luminous core of our being. This deep, inherent knowledge of the self is what sustains us, even in the face of the ego's anxieties and the world's apparent chaos. It is the quiet hum of our true nature, a melody that we can always return to, even when lost in the loudest storms. The question remains, a gentle whisper against the ego's clamor. What part of you must die so this ancient remembrance, this eternal self, can finally be reborn into the light of your conscious life? The answer is not a destination, but a continuous unveiling.